Hello, our beautiful listeners, and welcome back to the Full of Ourselves podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about good old self-sabotage. And I do have to say, before we get into this conversation, which is going to be juicy as hell, is that this is the second time that we're recording this podcast on self-sabotage because of self-sabotage, all sabotaging behavior, all the stuff that just goes a little bit like, oops, that went a little bit sideways. However, we are back and we are determined we're going to do this, and we know it is going to be fire because, well, the first one was fire, wasn't it, Anna?
It was. It was. It's one of those things where the recording just didn't work properly, but we had a brilliant conversation and we're going to have another brilliant conversation, and that's fine. So
Yeah.
I think it's worth acknowledging that fact of, like, sometimes we just have to kind of keep going and move through and just go, okay, that didn't work out.
Yeah.
It's fine. We're
Yeah.
doing
And
it
in a
again.
way, it's not necessarily this was necessarily self-sabotage. We just thought it was quite amusing, just something went wrong and it was a technical thing. So, that's just to put a little bit of a note to that one. But what is self-sabotage? How do you define self-sabotage? I think that's a really good place to start.
It is a good place to start. I think what's interesting about it is when we think about self-sabotage, I think sometimes we think that it's a real conscious thing. And I think
Mm.
sometimes, it might be conscious, but I think a lot of it is unconscious, it's fear-based,
Yeah.
it's something that is happening, something that you're doing to
Mm.
to stop your progress in a
Mm.
particular area. And as I said, sometimes it might be that we're like, oh, we're in fear and we're just like, don't turn up to the meeting. We don't go to the job interview. We don't, you know, that would be really obvious self
Mm.
sabotage. But I think there are some, and I think what more importantly and interestingly are those kind of patterns that we have that we need to identify for ourselves. And we're going to be talking about how do we do that today. What do you think about a definition?
I love that. And I love that making that clarity between those obvious places where we keep doing that. And we might even say to ourselves, God, I just sabotaged that again. But then the more kind of curious part of self-sabotage, I think we might not realize we're doing it until perhaps there's a question that comes up for us as, why has this happened again? This keeps happening to me, or I'm getting the same kind of results, or here I am again. And I think we get to a point where there's a kind of curiosity around, okay, hold on a second, something is happening and it just seems too much of a coincidence. And it could be that the answer that you're looking for is there are these little squiggly worms of self-sabotage. I always have the Muppets in my head. They did a fabulous song with worms. It's a sound that's made by worms, just going off into a slight tangent there. I really recommend it, especially for a dull autumn day like today. But there's some things kind of playing out. And I think what you're saying around fear, and I'm glad that you mentioned that word, is because really it I can imagine that most of the ways that we go about self-sabotaging are anchored or rooted in fear. And all of it's kind of it's friends and relations like shame and doubt and you know, all of those kind of places as well. Have you experienced, is this
Yeah, and
familiar to you?
anxiety, and
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting one. I was just going to say as well, sometimes people around us, our loved ones, spot it more in us than we spot it
Mm.
ourselves. I think sometimes there's patterns that come out, or your
Mm.
coach will spot the patterns that you have, and will identify them to you, because I think sometimes, with the best will in the world, we're not that we don't see it, because it's almost like our brain is trying to almost hide it from us. It's like, oh, this is too scary, this is too scary,
Yeah.
okay, we're not going to do this. And there's a really a really brilliant reason we're not going to do this, and it doesn't feel like self-sabotage. It feels like, oh, this isn't the right time, or that, it's all of the excuses that we have in our heads for why something isn't happening right now. um where does it come up for me? This is a very good question. I think
Mm.
for me, actually, it comes up a lot um, around the end of a project. I
Okay.
think sometimes you're working on a project and you doing the work, and then suddenly it's almost like, okay, I'm almost like I'm done with this now, even before I've kind of launched it to the world or finished it or done it. And I think it's that shiny ball syndrome. It's that new thing. It's like, oh, I'm
Uh,
just so excited about something new now, and I'm kind of done with this thing now. But I think it's a type of self-sabotage, but it's that fear that, maybe this isn't going to work, maybe this, I've put all of this effort and energy into this, and it's not going to come off, so let me just pull back, let me just say, oh well, I didn't really want it anyway, and just, let me just pull back from this. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. And you know what? It's making me think about, I think the self-sabotage thing comes at the most, doesn't it? When things matter to us, like they really matter to us, like we're invested, like our heart's
Absolutely.
invested, we care, there's a lot of feelings involved, there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and we've put a lot of our resources in, a lot of our time and our energy, and maybe invested money-wise as well. And it's this feeling, I think, from when you were sharing that of almost like we just take our foot off the pedal, There's
Yeah.
almost this kind of like uh impulsive desire or need to do that. And that kind of happens every time and slows everything down. And then, because a big part of all of this, and we're going to like explore a little bit more some of these things that we're touching upon. We're just going through a bit of an overview to begin with, is
Yeah.
very interesting, especially when you bring up about this happens for you around towards the end of things. Thank you for naming that. Is like, what happens then at the end of something, right? Then it's completed. Maybe then it's visible. Maybe then we're ready for feedback. Maybe then it's out in the world and people are going to get on board and you're going to have to show up and share what you're doing. And actually part of the self-sabotage can come from a fear of, yes, failure. We've put so much into this, it's going to be too disappointing, it's going to hurt, if it doesn't work. And this is something that a lot of us don't realize, is what if it succeeds? What if this works out? What if this goes better than I even imagine? Because actually, sometimes self sabotage can also be this weird protector in us for not
Hmm.
necessarily having to then be responsible to step up into that full time responsibility and self accountability of what it is that we're doing. Um, and our heads can make up all this stuff, can't it? Oh my God, then it's going to be like, I'm going to have no time for anything else. It's going to be go, go, go. I'm just going to get exhausted. I might get burnt out. What if I realize this isn't the right path? All these things that the head's going to come up and come up with. And that can actually stop us from really stepping into our brilliance, actually, and offering out our brilliance into the world. Um, there's a saying, isn't there, about, don't know who said this, something about when we don't share our gifts, whatever way that comes through, whether it's our art, whether it's our business, whether it's our, coaching or whatever it might be, when we don't share those places, it's actually very selfish, keeping all of that stuff just for
Mm.
ourselves. So there's that kind of weird
That's
thing that,
interesting.
yeah, self-sabotage can actually keep us in that smaller, less responsible, less risky place where we don't have to be selfish. Well, we can, where we are selfish in holding everything rather than going, okay, I'm going to put it out there. And fucking hell, this is going to be a roller coaster ride. No idea what's going to happen next, but I am on board.
Definitely. And I know the stats in business are, businesses that fail can be because they don't really kind of get out there, they don't launch, they do that.
Mhm.
But there is also a number of businesses that fail because they become too big too quickly, and the
Um,
person finds it difficult to kind of keep up with the demand that they've got as well. So, I think
mm.
these are kind of, we don't want to dismiss people's fears or anxieties or worries or these things that are coming up. That's not what we're saying here. We're not saying just go for it, just do it, just, we are kind of saying that, but but we're not saying, your anxieties and your fears are not valid, and they're not
Yeah.
important, and we need to remember that it's our mind, like you said, trying to keep us safe. It's
Yeah.
trying to keep us small and safe, but actually, is small and safe what we want from our lives? And I think probably if you're listening to this, the
Yeah.
answer is no. We want you to be full of yourself. We want that for you and for us. That's why we've called our podcast Full of Ourselves. It's, and that's why we wanted to talk about this, because this is something that comes up for everybody, absolutely everybody.
I
This is
wonder.
why it's so important.
I wonder if it is mainly I don't know. Maybe you know the stats. My data living friend collaborator. I wonder if it comes up more for women, the self sabotage, than it is for men. I'd be really curious to know um, the kind of statistics around that. I don't, because I think there's something about
Yeah,
one of the
I
reasons you
don't
might.
know. Hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the reasons I think we might sabotage. I'm just looking at it in that kind of gendered, very gendered way right now. Is possibly this
Hmm.
need for us to be perfect, have it all together, have all of the credentials up to like, gold standards, all of the experience, all of the know-how. And I do know that, I think we might have discussed this before, or if not, we might get to it at some point, that men are far more likely, or were far more likely. We really hope this is changing to apply for roles, apply for jobs, to take on positions when they
Hmm.
actually don't necessarily have all of those boxes ticked. They just have this absolute and utter, yeah, I can do this. I'm going to do this. Whereas I think traditionally women have been like, oh my God, I can't, I've not got all the skills needed. And maybe that comes up for some of us as to why we
Yeah.
self sabotage, this almost like, this isn't perfect enough. I'm not perfect enough. I'm this, I'm that, and so on. It could be a good thing to kind of reflect upon if you're listening to this. Is that going on for you, this insidious kind of perfectionism thing running the show underneath?
I
Mm.
think that there's a thing that I've heard of before, and I think it can happen with the good girls. You know how I work with the good girl personalities, and it's called paper chasing. And paper chasing is kind of keep going after the next qualification, the next certificate.
Oh,
It's the
wow.
paper, because you've got to get your certificates. You've got to, and until you have that, you don't feel like you are able to talk about a particular area or work in a specific area. And I think,
Mm.
and it's a delaying tactic as well, isn't it? Because a lot of times, especially if you've got your own business, something like that, we just need to get ourselves out there. I think it is so true that there are people out there who have less experience than you, less
Yeah.
qualifications than you, maybe, it doesn't matter, but who are out there and they are making a business and they are charging more than you. We'll get into money as well at some point. And, you know, because they are able to, because they haven't self-sabotaged, and because they feel that self-worth. I think
Mm.
self-sabotage and self-worth kind of a little bit, on the come together a little bit, don't they?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and like, it's also making me think of a kind of another, like, kind of flipping that a little bit. And this is part of taking self accountability. Is if you recognize it's the pattern for you and you have that going on, it could be that you do actually need to go and upskill, or you do need to go and learn
Mhm.
particular skills to bring in. It might be that, yeah, actually there's an area in your business or in your art or in your marketing or whatever it might be where going and doing a course. I love the paper chasing thing. It makes me feel a bit of a pang though of missing Paper Chase, that beautiful stationery store. Yes, anyway. Um, but that could be something that's like, hold on a second, what is, I think the thing about self sabotage is kind of, once we recognize that might be going on, is to look at that and go, right, first of all, what is in my mind? What is coming from maybe old beliefs that I need to maybe look at and question, because we don't tend to do that? And what is actually coming from where there is a
Mm.
very obvious need for something more? And that might be getting a coach. That's why we're in business and do what we do. You might need that support. You might need someone to help you to see where you're standing in your self-sabotage again, because in lots of ways, it's just the recognizing of it in order for us to go, oh, I have a choice. Okay, I can do that. And that's going to give me that result. Or I can try something different, and that will be scary because it will be new and unfamiliar and unknown. But there is lots of support around, and there's lots of groups, whether it's group programs, whether it's one-to-one coaching, whether it's free things on social media, whether it's books, podcasts. I mean, it's amazing. We live in a time, don't we, where there's so many resources. And a bit like the paper chasing, we can also get lost in the reading all the books, listening to all the things, doing all these courses.
Mhm.
That can be another way we self-sabotage, of like waiting till we're ready. Waiting's one, isn't it? I'm having a hot flush, so I'm just going to have to get my fan.
Oh yeah, I think waiting is a big one, and I think that going after doing loads of certificates, so it's like I just need to do one more thing, I just need to do one more thing. Do you know how many degrees I have?
No, two.
4.
Oh my God. Is this in this lifetime?
So let me
I
tell
didn't
you,
know you
I
had
am
four.
perfectionistic.
Wow, you've got a lot of
Let me
letters
tell
after
you,
your
I
name.
haven't done one for. I have more letters after my name than in my name, but I'm
It's
not saying that to. I'm not saying that to be to brag, because I think, well, I think we'll brag later, but I think you know that was I was getting stuck in. I was getting
Mm,
stuck in that, oh, I'm not quite there yet, I don't quite have the qualifications yet, I don't quite have the
mm.
experience yet. And sometimes, that is absolutely true. If you want to be a doctor, you can't just go, I'm just going to call myself a doctor. Okay,
Yeah, I'm just going
that's
to go
true.
on YouTube and look at some
So
videos
that's,
on how to perform things, isn't it? That's
yeah,
fine, I'm
I
done.
can be a surgeon, I'm sure that's fine. So, I think that's important. But I
Mm,
think we can get into that, and it can become the self-sabotage, because it's like, well, once I've done this, and it's
mm.
always like, oh, once this has happened, oh, once, and it can be a point of like, actually sometimes we just need to stop that
Just do
and
it.
get started with whatever it is that's really important to us.
Yeah,
And I think
and
that, for
yeah,
me, I've learned over a long time.
I think this thing of just going for it really is just starting, isn't it? Like you mentioned about, for you, the saboteur in you comes in towards the end of something because of the shiny new, I call it shiny new object syndrome, or the
I
whatever it
like that.
is, and off you do scamper away to something all glitzy and glittery and like, whoo, this is all new and like it's exciting. Um, but working as with creatives and being really fascinated by the creative process, this can happen in any part of the creative process. And actually, if you start to catch where it's happening for you, you'll probably see it happens all throughout different aspects of your life being the biggest creative process. And I know from what we are just talking about gathering all the, the paper chasing and gathering this and reading all the information, doing all the courses, that could be for you that you sabotage before you even begin. Like all the reasons that we said about waiting
Mhm.
for the right
Mhm.
time, being perfect, blah, blah, blah. It also could be sabotaging once you're in the middly bit of the creative process, where the work happens, where it's very ordinary, where maybe the big sparkle of excitement at the beginning's gone. It's all kind of quieting down. You can't quite see the ending yet when something else, and it can be that, that's when the work happens. It's you've got to roll up your sleeves
Yeah.
and do stuff. You've got to stay with. And for a lot of us, that can be where we get a little bit like, I'm bored, I'm stuck, it's not exciting anymore, doubting what are they doing over there, I'm just going to procrastinate now so time goes on. I know for me, that used to be the thing. I'd get to a certain point, and maybe it's not happening. This is a big one. Not happening as fast as I want it to. We're not getting those results. I'll just stop, put it all down, feel better for
Mm.
a while. We
I
always
think
get a
that,
relief. But then it's like, okay,
yeah.
then I have to start again. It's like, oh, wow, we have reached the end. So it's a good to notice. Oh, where's this happening? And do I want to continue doing that? Or am I willing to see what happens if I go into that next place?
Yeah, I think there's two things that kind of come up in that middle bit. It's kind of like, oh, this is hard. So it's
Mm,
always harder than you think. There's lots of processes, and there's that invisible architecture that I always talk about that's going
mm,
on underneath whatever we're doing. And also, I'm not good enough. There's a kind of, so this is difficult and I'm not good enough can sometimes come together to be that, like, right, well, I need to quit this. So this is the wrong thing for me. And I think that's where it's tough, isn't it? To know what
mm.
is wrong for me that I need to walk away, and what is right for me, I just need to stay the course.
Yeah. Oh my God. So much. And I don't think there's an easy answer to that, is there? Because only we know
There's
really
not.
whether
I
it's
don't
like,
think so.
do we spend more time? Do we spend more time? Like talked about, or and I've been thinking about this of, the myth of the overnight success. Someone could have been working on something for 10 years, 20 years, and then suddenly, whatever reason, stars align, whatever, da-da, it suddenly works. Or yeah, like you say, like this isn't quite right. I think that's just a chance we have to take sometimes, isn't it? Of knowing which of those
Yeah,
is the way to go.
I
I
think
was
it's a
gonna
good thing to
mm,
talk about with a coach.
mm,
Um, and I think there's a few things we can kind of spot in ourselves, because I think if it's fear and it's not, I think there's a kind of a quiet knowing about whether something is the right path for
yeah,
you, and
yeah,
that's in the body. I don't think it has words. I think it's a knowing, and I think we've I know for me, before I started learning about coaching and things like that, I was very, very much kind of outside of my body. I couldn't really kind of get into that.
yeah.
There's a kind of a knowing about that, and I think the fear is loud. It's chatter. It's trying to protect you. It's not trying to. It's not particularly trying. Well, it is trying to stop you, but it's not doing that in a malicious way. It is a protection thing.
Mm,
And I think sometimes we need to take a step back and say, okay, is this still the right thing? Is this
mm,
still what I want? Is this still the right path? And
mm.
just kind of come back into the body on that. And just sometimes we have to say to it's a little bit like I haven't seen it. So the film Inside Out, is it, where you've got
Oh my God, it's
different
so
parts of
good.
the
Oh, it's so good.
I
Yeah.
need to go and see that one.
Yes, please.
But I think I love the way they've kind of characterized anxiety, and they've characterized those things, to those parts of ourselves. Um, and it's not about just going, you're wrong, you're wrong. It's about listening to that and going, thank you. I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to keep me safe. You're trying
Yeah.
to keep me from doing something silly and
Yeah.
stupid. And I'm still doing this, you know.
I love that because actually it's one of the things, it's one of the ways that I kind of work as well with clients because I love the playing with these parts of us and being a little bit more subversive with these parts of us. And you're just making me think now how gorgeous to actually take that part of us as this little character, the saboteur, give that part maybe a name. Maybe it's something like Serena the saboteur or something or other. I can see her being very like, I don't know why, she's got that kind of like feel to her. And she'll have like, if we take this and make it a character, that part of us, that part of us will have a way that I'm going to call it she, that mine feels like it's a she, that she'll
Mhm.
walk. She'll probably have certain outfits. She'll sit a certain way. She'll definitely have certain things that she says. She'll have her very usual phrases that will come out as the saboteur. And actually seeing that part as a real part of us, that we all have it. Some of us it's very loud, some of us maybe it's very quiet, but it's a very human part of us. But to be able to get to know it a little bit, to be able to to know when it comes up, maybe even be able to turn to it and go, okay, you're really shouting at me right now. I can feel you trying to pull all these strings so that it all unravels what I'm doing. What's going on? Are you okay? Are you scared about something? Do you want to have a chat about this before you actually do completely and utterly mess up all of this that I'm doing? Because that's not going to help any of us. I understand what you're trying to do. So actually, one of the tips that I would say, if this is something that's really huge for you, is get to know it, make it into a creature, a character, and it's a part of you. So you might as well like get to know it and what it needs. And it also might have some things to tell you that's quite wise. Like and I was saying, it
Absolutely.
might be there's certain things like it's going no or hold back is because actually that isn't quite right, or you are going to push yourself too much, or it's got a feeling that
Mm.
you're ignoring. You know what I mean?
I think that's so true. And I think the more we ignore those things, the louder it shouts. Because it's
Yes.
like we just need to acknowledge some of those things. And we need to, I love that about having a kind of a conversation with it and just
Yeah.
saying, look, I understand, this is a scary situation. This is the right path for me, but thank you for trying to keep me safe. And you can rest now because this part of us is probably exhausted and shouting hoarse, you know, to try and
Not horses
keep us
in.
safe.
Yay.
Hoarse with a
Yeah,
throat.
no, I know.
It's
But
horse
I
and
like the idea
shouting
of
horse.
sabotage just shouting horse. I don't know why.
So horse, horse. In some ways, I like the idea of playing with it as well, because when we can play with these things, we can then start taking ourselves less seriously.
That's
It's like, and I
it.
think, I think you're right. Coming back to what you were saying about it's those things that we really really important to us where these
Mm,
things come up.
mm.
If it's a little thing that we're just doing, this kind of thing's not going to come up. But when it's something that's really important to us, when it's a new part of our business or whatever that might be, this is when this comes up. And I think a point that we wanted to make was around, I think this fits really well here, is around separating our self-worth from the success or a failure of a project. I
So
think
how do
that's
we do
so
that, Anna?
key.
Seriously, how do we do that? I mean, it's great.
Well,
I'm really hearing. I've got my pen ready.
I
But
know.
how do we
I
do
think
that
it's
though?
I think it's difficult, obviously, because I feel
Mm,
like if we're putting ourselves in there, we're putting ourselves up out, putting it all out there, and we're putting everything we've got into this one thing, then the success or failure of it feels so personal. I think what we need to try to do is separate, maybe go on everything with curiosity. Oh, I wonder if this will
mm,
work. I wonder how, I wonder what the next step might be for this. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, what's the next step? What can I learn from that? What's the next step now? And it's taking it almost less seriously,
mm.
because when we take it so seriously, I think that's where
The pressure, isn't there?
there's an energy around that, isn't there? There's a pressure, there's so much riding on it, and then we can kind of fail because we're just frozen from
Yeah,
it.
I think that, thank you for saying that. I think that's a really big point. And I certainly recognize that in myself and maybe it's part of, I'm totally on board with your good girl rebellion offering because I recognize so many of those places in myself. And part of that is, getting all the A stars, being the best student. And I think how that's impacted a lot of my life has been, I've, I didn't realize this for a long time, but I put so much expectation on myself that
Mm.
so much that I'm going to disappoint myself. It's inevitable. It's not possible always to tick all of those things. And to realize that is that massive relief of, oh my God, I've been doing that to myself. It's not coming from outside of me. And that's a lot to hold. So no wonder then part of me is going, do you know what? I'll take some of this off you. The saboteur bit's coming in, going, darling, I'll take some of these bits off you. Don't you worry. Just give that to me. I'll take on that project. Oops, oh dear. It all fell off the tray. It's that could be working in that weird way with something else. They're not so easily defined. There's something else around this with the self-worth piece that's just dropped in as you were speaking as well of, I mean, when you were talking about curiosity, it really touched me. I think that's so beautiful because it's kind. There's a kindness there. But
Mhm.
it's also, I think, remembering why we're doing whatever we're doing. And when you touched upon we take things personally, I think sometimes we can forget maybe we've got a bigger vision. I always kind of say, come back to what's the bigger vision here? What's the bigger why? That's bigger than just you. It's just that you've been the brave one to go, do you know what? I'm going to be the one that creates this because it serves this in life, or it can support this in others, or it can help that. A lot of things we do, a lot of the businesses that we put out there, they're to be of service. There's a need for something that we think can help improve people's lives in some capacity. And it's very easy to forget that, and it all to become it's all about me when it's not. And I think often zooming out into that bigger vision and remembering can take some of that pressure off, some of that expectation, maybe ease the saboteur a little and go, that's okay. This is for something bigger than who I am. Yeah, let's keep going. Let's just try this because it's worth more than, it's not just about me then. It's got a bigger meaning or worth towards it. I don't know if that resonates at all.
Yeah, I love that. I think when I can focus on the impact of what I'm doing on individuals, and then hoping that that will grow to hundreds and thousands and millions of people, that's the aim. That's where I want to be. But it is like you say, it's not well, maybe it is ego driven, but I don't want it to be ego driven, because it's actually about like how much impact, how much help, how much support can I give to the good girls out there, who maybe are looking for this, or maybe they're not even don't even know they're looking for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I think when I come back to that and think about that, then it's, yeah, the pressure's not so much about me, it's about like what how can I
Yeah.
how can I get this out there further?
Yeah, it's quite humbling, isn't it? And then the self-sabotage, the clues in the title doesn't necessarily then come in as much because it's not about self and our self reputation or worth in that way. Yeah, it's something bigger. I think as well, identifying, we've touched on a few places where the self-sabotage can come in, but thinking about other places where it you might not realize this is self-sabotage, but I think one of those places is, especially in the big social media world we live in right now, and it's very packed and saturated and lots of stuff, is in
Mm.
comparison. When we look at being in comparison or
Oh,
competition with others, isn't it? Like immediately, and it's almost going back to that small kind of part of us again we've just been talking about. And then often when we do that, we probably come up. Well, it goes either. I think often it goes either two ways. It's either like we're not good enough, we're not enough, as you said before. That's a huge one, or we're better than. Which is also that's unsustainable. It's like a balloon that's going to be popped at some point, and so I think that is a good thing to look out for, isn't it? If you're noticing that's going on, it's like, okay, the saboteur is doing something. Just watch out here a little bit.
that's
Mm.
so true. I think it's with the way the world is right now, with people on social media, and even if we're not necessarily on social media all the time every day, we're still going to see others and see, well, we need to remember that we're seeing what people want to show us. you know, we're only going to see the edited highlights, aren't we? Like, really and truthfully, um, people are
Yeah.
not going to show the things that went wrong and the warts and all of that. So we need to remember that, because firstly, it's difficult to make a comparison anyway, because we are different people, we have different experiences, we have different things to share with the world, and we're going to connect with different kinds of people. So whether you have a product-based business or a service-based business, in that's what's going to be. It's not like there's one supermarket out there in the high street, or there's not like there's one clothes shop out there. There is a place for different things and different people and different times. That there's a place for us. And I think sometimes we can look and go, oh well, that person's doing something similar to what I want to do, but they seem to be doing better than me. And
Mhm.
then that feels like a moment to step back and say, well, if I can't, so why should I bother, kind of thing.
Totally.
And you
That's it.
shouldn't,
Exactly.
because what you're bringing to the
Exactly.
world is something more.
It's such a shame, isn't it? I think it's part of the feminine wound. It's very old and possibly very patriarchal of like turning women against each other rather than with each other,
Yeah.
rather than standing next to your sister, your best friend or whoever and going, wow, you're doing amazing. Look at what you're offering. And then us holding our big space of what we're doing and then somebody else, like there's space. Well, it reminds me of like, it's so weird, isn't it? Like it's certain places. I was in Vietnam earlier this year, and I'd forgotten about this till just now, actually, in Hanoi, great city, and they have lots of streets. They're quite kind of famousy, and they're all just working normal, local streets. But each street is actually named after. So there's a ladder street, which all of the stores, the shops sell ladders. There's a paint street. There's a stationery street. There's a pan street. You've got all these stores
Yes.
selling pretty much the same thing, and they're all next to each other. And you might be thinking, well, that's just stupid. But no, it's like a community, and maybe they can support each other. And, it's, I've forgotten about that. It was actually really good fun. There's another thing I want to say here as well, where I'm just thinking of places the sabotage can show up for us in business. I think one of those places is around how much we charge. Like we might
Mm.
charge much too low. I think that's probably more where we sabotage rather than the other way, I have to be honest. For something, because again, the worth thing that you're saying, is reflected back, in the head, well, no one's gonna like, but what will people say if I try? All of these places are the saboteur coming in. It might be that you're not selling something because it is too low and people can feel the energetic difference. So it's good to look at how you're pricing your work. Is stuff coming up for you as you're putting that value on there? That's reflecting your value and your years of working in this field and your 4 degrees or whatever it is that you're bringing to the table. Um, that can come in a lot, can't it? Mm.
Oh, this is such a massive thing, particularly for female entrepreneurs, because we
Yeah.
know about the glass ceiling. We know, I don't think there's any country in the world where people are paid, women are paid with equal pay. It's a
Mm.
massive issue. But what we need to acknowledge as well is that there is an issue in entrepreneurship as well. And this is where we are choosing our own pricing. And men, on the whole, are charging more for a similar or lower quality product or service. And this has got to stop. And this is something I'm going to do a whole campaign about, because I think this is a really, really important thing. And I think there's lots of different reasons why. So that, and I can maybe we'll talk about this on another podcast episode, because I think it's such a massive issue. But self-sabotage is definitely one of the ways. I think sometimes we can feel like I'm not quite confident about this, and so, well, if I put the price a little bit lower, then I can feel like I can put this out into the world now. But actually, that is self-sabotaging. People will see and think, oh, that seems too cheap, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to put your prices up after that when you've kind of attracted an audience in for that. So many times I see people who get the courage up to put their prices up and actually make more sales, because it just
It's
relates
aligned.
to the service or the product that they are actually giving.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
owning their
aligned,
own worth,
absolutely.
isn't it? Going back to that owning their own worth. And it doesn't mean you won't have all the voices and not all the fears and all the, you just see one of the big pieces for me around this and what I'm much more interested in um is the nervous system, the capacity to hold. It might be like we don't consciously fear success, but we don't have the capacity. So then we'll automatically go into self-sabotage to kind of go back smaller again. And I think there's learning about how much capacity do we have to hold this, to take the next step? And there's lots of things that you can go and explore around this. And I think part of that, on a very base level, especially if you're solopreneur and you're doing all this yourself, is, are you taking enough breaks? Do you need to turn your social media off, or not look at anything for a weekend or a day or half a day if all that seems, a bit much? Are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you getting enough social connection? Are you having some good times? Are you letting your hair down? These things, especially the beginning of a business, isn't it? Or even in the business, in the middly bit, all of it probably. I know for myself, I have to really watch that because, especially if you're working for yourself, it's no 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It's you can work 24/7 every day of the whole of your life. You've got to, we've got to look out for that balance. And then wonder why the hell am I sabotaging things? It's like maybe it's just because you need a good night's sleep
Yeah.
and a night out with your mates.
You're exhausted.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
Yeah,
There's no
I think
shame
that's
in
such an
that.
important point. Mm. Yeah,
Mm. So we're really
yeah.
curious
No, you're
about, if
right.
you're
There is no
listening.
shame in that. Mhm.
No, and I think a lot of these places, a lot of shame hooks under that. But we'd love to know, like, just listening to this, and we've come up with some examples. Where do you self sabotage? Because I guaranteed, another woman or us or whoever's listening will be nodding as going, oh my God, I do that as well. Or thank you for naming that. I was a bit too embarrassed to say that. So we'd love it if you shared with us. Let's just free these places so we can see them. And then we know we have a choice perhaps to do something differently. But it also makes me, want to say to you all, and we're both in agreement with this, of, we're going to get stuff wrong. We're going to fuck up. We are going to drop the plates when we couldn't quite hold them for whatever reason and have to start over, and it's okay. Yeah, it's part of it, isn't it?
Yeah. I think you're right. The self-sabotage is kind of part of the process sometimes
Mm,
of a I think there's a little bit, especially as we've said, it's if it's important to us, if it feels like part of what's our mission for right now, this is what I'm doing, this is, it feels so important. And I think we don't wait to say this about fear and anxiety and things. We can't wait for that to subside. We have to take even the smallest step forward. I don't have to leap off anything, but take a
mm,
smallest step forward each day and just say, okay, yes, I am in fear. I do feel anxious. I am worried about this. But the only way out is through. We can't
mm,
think our way out of fear and anxiety. Um, Unfortunately,
mm,
it would be
mm,
good if we could just get kind of just like off we go, but it doesn't work that way. We need to just take those small steps. We need to be brave, even these little micro
mm,
steps, tiny
mm,
things, because I think is it this saying that fear is a mile wide but an inch deep? So it's kind of like
oh,
when we actually it looks massive, but when we step into it, it's like, oh, okay, this is not as deep as I thought it was, and if I
I
can
love
just keep
that.
moving forwards, then yeah, then I'm not going to drown. It looks massive, it's really wide and it looks like the whole sea, but actually it's just tiny, tiny depths. Let's just kind of keep moving forwards. And it's easy to say and harder to do, I know. Like we both acknowledge that we're not here trying to
Mm,
go, yeah, we've worked it all out. We know. This is something that every single person
yeah.
is struggling with. But I think if you can find your way, if you can talk to your fears, you can feel where they're coming from and be grateful for them trying to
Mm.
keep you safe and keep moving forwards. I think that's what we need to do.
That's beautiful. Again, there's a sense of a lot of compassion. It's really important to have compassion to ourselves. So, what if we keep going and falling down the
Absolutely.
same sabotage well? There's no beating ourselves up isn't going to change anything. So, we can just go, oops, I did it again. Oops, I did it again. I think the- Brittany, Brittany said that. So, take Brittany as like,
Yeah.
maybe not as a role model necessarily. Maybe. But yeah, being really kind to yourself around that. And I think, like, I think one of the biggest things is having support. I think sometimes, as we've started off saying at the very beginning, sometimes we don't see where it's obvious to somebody else. So, maybe you find like a
Yeah.
networking group of other women and there's a kind of close, maybe you create that with a group of friends, who are business friends, learning how to take those steps and to face those places. Or you come and work with a coach who are qualified to not to tell you how to do it, but to stand and walk that path with you. Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
this is all how
And
we learn.
spot the patterns, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think when you work with somebody, and you and I have been working together for many years now,
Mm,
I think it's easy to spot the patterns in someone else than it is to spot them in yourself. And I think
yeah.
if you work with a skilled coach, both of us are happy to help and would love to do
Mm,
that.
mm,
Um, it it can make a massive difference, and I think it's a shortcut. Because I think sometimes it just takes us that time to be able to identify this for ourselves, and I think it can take years, decades sometimes, to spot these things.
yeah,
And I
lifetime.
think when you invest in a coach and say, yeah, a lifetime, and start working with somebody and say, right, I really want to start moving forwards. I really want to do
Mm,
this. I mean, I know that we had a coaching session quite recently, last week, I think it was, and Heidi was coaching me because we coach each other, and it's had a massive impact. Just
mm,
the realizations that came from that are really have been really big for me.
yeah.
And I think it's important to say, I think you're right. I think the good girls, particularly, we find accountability very helpful in getting things done. We find having support and collaboration really helpful in terms of getting things
Mm,
done, because we may
mm.
let ourselves down, but we're never going to let someone else down. So if you can build
Ooh.
in accountability and say, well, if I'm doing this particular thing and I'm working with this person, I'm not going to let that person down. But if I say, oh, today I'm going to get put out an email or something, I could always go, oh, I'm not quite ready to do that. I'm just going to
Mm.
not do that. So I think if you're clever and you know yourself, you can build in the things that you need, those kind of checks and balances, and the things that you need in order to kind of keep moving forwards.
Yeah, I love all of that. And just to say as well, maybe before we close this conversation today, also, maybe your sabotaging is telling you you're on the wrong path. Maybe this isn't really what you want to be doing. Maybe you're choosing this because you think you should, or everyone else is around you, or this is what is expected of you, or this is what you said you were going to do 10 years ago, and you don't know what else. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. That can actually be incredibly radical if you look at things and go, why do I keep doing this? But the truth is, I actually don't want to be doing this. I actually want to go and be, I'm going to say a florist because I'm just looking at a beautiful vase of flowers in front of me. And that can be incredibly liberating. And there's no shame in that either. So get really honest with yourself, with the places that are holding you back, whether this is aligned to who you are and it connects with having an impact, a vision, and yeah, see what happens. We'd love, love, love to know your thoughts. Yeah, anything from this. We'd also love to know if there's a theme or a subject you'd love us to to have as a theme for the podcast. Anything else you want to share, Anna, before we wrap up for today?
No, I think this has really been a brilliant episode, a brilliant conversation, and we would just absolutely love to hear around your patterns around self sabotage. What have your reflections been? Have there been any exercises or anything that you've done that has really helped you? I
Mm,
think that is so important. And I think it is difficult because sometimes we're saying, oh, just keep going, keep going. But as you've mentioned, self sabotage can sometimes be around like, actually, am I on the right path?
yeah,
And I think it can be around just having those reflections. Sometimes for me, journaling really helps, and just kind of getting what's in my head out on paper. um and as you said, sometimes we can just feel like we've invested so much in this one pathway. We just have, and suddenly we're like, okay, now I know this is not the right pathway. I think to say that nothing you do is wasted.
yeah,
Absolutely everything and who you are
yeah,
is an amalgamation of all of those things that you have done. And something that you have done and you think, oh well, I'm on the wrong path, I can bet that it will be something that you bring to what you do next, and it will make you a complete individual, completely unique at what you're going to do next. So
mm.
um never feel like anything is wasted. I think that's
I
an
love
important point
that.
too.
I love that, including all the places you might have sabotaged over the years. You have no idea. They might become stories you tell to others to inspire them, or
Yeah.
the things that you are part of your greatest growth. Yeah, I love that, that nothing is wasted. That's wonderful. I feel like all this stuff's popping up, so I think we need to like probably wrap up before we go into like
Yeah.
like a part two there, isn't it?
No, I
There's
think
just
that
so much. It's a huge topic.
I know there's so much. There's so much, and I'm sure we'll touch on this again because it's such a big issue around fear and things. But thank you so much, Heidi. What a fantastic conversation, and we will see you again next time for another episode of the Full of Ourselves podcast.